sometimes stuff like that. It is one of those days. And ladies and gentlemen, Whitney Webb with the steel chair.
Hey.
Whitney Webb with the steel chair.
Steel chair? I don't get it.
Steel chair.
Like pro wrestling, where the dude just kind of comes in from out of nowhere, grabs the chair.
Those aren't actually steel.
Wrecking
No,
shop.
they're not. It's just my favorite meme during the Trump inauguration. It was like we're all set for Trump's inauguration, and what is this? It's Bernie Sanders with a steel chair. Like he was, that's when I had a little.
I don't
bit
think Bernie
something left
Sanders
in
would
the
ever.
tank.
He'd use like a foam chair and be like, "I slightly disagree with you, Joe Biden, but mostly support what you do."
Yeah, but that'll back you completely. Anyway,
But you can bomb Putin.
He's an absolute
And it's
chair.
not even a chair. It's just one of those "we're number one" foam
fingers.
fingers.
Yeah, pretty much.
With you got to get the big hat one too, Steve. It's like, bah.
I would actually like to see Bernie Sanders in a giant foam sombrero. That would be
that sounds
would
like
be
SNL
delightful.
kind of a thing.
Well, welcome, Whitney. I wanted to
Hey.
surprise everybody today and with Whitney Webb, so I snuck onto the DMs and said, "Hey, Whit, why don't you sneak on in tomorrow for TLAV Tuesday and kind of come in around 8-ish and have some fun with us?" So thank you so much for coming on today.
Yeah, sure. Didn't really have like help with the kids for like 5 weeks. So this is like my first day with a babysitter. It's
God,
nice.
I always say this, but I just don't know how you guys do it with kids and family. Just
Yeah,
all
it's
the work.
really it's really stressful and hard. Yeah, because I'm also trying to like build a house to, go live somewhere that I own and I'm not renting, and that's a headache. So it takes up a lot of time too.
I'm not the
If you want to
smartest
hire
guy.
a carpenter, I'll
Ugh.
fly down.
There
You wanna fly to Chile to do that? Yeah, all right.
A couple of months, maybe whatever kind of house you want.
But you have to
if
build a
I
stick
come
built
there,
house
there's
right
nothing
next to
getting
it, too.
done. I'm so sorry. I was just saying, if I go down there, there's nothing's getting done. It's just nothing but partying and fun time. So if Steve goes, you might get some work done. Not me, though.
Right.
Sorry.
All
Tina.
right.
I was just saying, no, I was just going to say, yeah, but he's going to build a mother-in-law house next to it that you won't know about that he's going to be living in, and it's forever.
Right, about
All right.
about 700 yards away in a little grove. It'll be a little tiny house and a really big deck.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, could probably make that work. We'll see. So anyway, what would you guys like to talk about? There's a lot going on.
There's a
The
lot
world's
going on.
Stupid and frustrating, and
We were just talking about the terrain germ theory overlap, and I thought that was, we don't have to get into it again, but it was an interesting conversation that I know you know well about the not that specific conversation, but the dynamic Piers was talking about where, where people are these limited conversations where you get attacked for saying things you didn't do or blah, blah, blah. It's everywhere today where, it's crazy. We don't have to get into it if you don't want to, but.
I just want to piggyback on that too as well, but there's also an element we hit, right? And that is, and the reason why I asked that question, Whitney, is because, like I said, there were people on the stage at the Rage Against the War Machine rally that were on the stage at Defeat the Mandates. And I saw an organizer and he came to me, he's like, how do we bring these two together? And my mind starts working. Well, the terrain theory, germ theory people, they seem to be kind of clashing off, but yet they still agree on a lot of things. Like they agree that the PCR testing was bullshit. They agree that the vaccine is really bad.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I see what you mean. So
how do
basically, remember how 9/11 Truth worked out, right? It was just insane infighting over details, and even though everyone agrees that the government's lying about 9/11 and that should just really have been like a unifying starting point, it sort of devolved into squabbles of the Pentagon, it was a plane, it was a missile. No, there weren't planes at all. It was, there was a nuke. And, I mean, like, I'm not an expert on that stuff. I think the US government clearly and provably lied about pretty much every aspect of September 11th, 2001. But, when people devolve into arguing over specifics, when there's complex intelligence linked operations, whether it's something like 9/11 or something like the COVID-19 situation and response, we're never going to know, at least until there's a massive, huge change in how transparency works in the US government in the world, 100% of exactly what went down. And we're sort of, there's stuff that we can document and look at that clearly proves that some crazy shit has happened. in both of those instances and a lot of other stuff as well, right? But to say that, oh, we know for 100% it was this or that, those squabbles end up being used to divide a lot of these movements, and people become more concerned about being 100% right than, solving anything, right? And I think that's a broader problem in some of these movements and in alternative media in general, that people just want to be right all the time and nitpick over stuff and can't really see the bigger picture and can't really build any sort of cohesive movement, because there's just a lot of arguments over specifics, right? And those specifics can be important, but it's the divisiveness, and it's this like very toxic rhetoric of, if you don't agree with me, then you're a shill, which isn't really that different from George W. Bush's, you're either with us or you're with the terrorists. It's that same kind of mentality. So, I don't really see it as productive.
My pal Sammy always says the significant problem with all of this stuff is that people would rather be right than do right. And so when you have people hyper focused on what being right is, they lose sight of, as you were saying, the overall problem, which is you can prove demonstrably, case after case after case after case, that the government is lying to you, that they are lying to you with the intent to further abuse you, and that there is significant legislation or corporate programs that always follow these lies that make sure that they are allowed to further abuse you. I'm not going to say it doesn't matter, but it is less critical in the moment to wade through the minutia of exactly getting it 100% right when you all recognize the real significant threat. And this is across the board for whatever it is, from 9/11 to German terrain theory or freaking flat earth or who shot JFK. It doesn't matter. It doesn't. That's the part that doesn't matter. We can all agree that we've been systemically lied to and systemically abused.
But Steve, 1 second, Ryan. I'm so sorry, but because guys, I want your guys' opinion on this. This is really important here. But we're talking about, in this particular one, this is not an argument about like what hit the Pentagon, a plane or a missile, right? This is about virology. This is about an actual science. Does it exist, right? Does it work? You know what I'm saying? These are people, when you have doctors who believe in what they've been practicing their whole lives, to be told that what they're practicing is a joke, that cuts a little bit deeper than the actual minutia and the little,
well, it's similar though, right? Because it's like a disagreement about stuff that's not necessarily that relevant to addressing some of the root issues, at least not starting to address it, right? So whether viruses exist or they don't, that's ultimately irrelevant to the fact that the COVID crisis was a massive scam, and it was lies from the very beginning, and several years of lies. If you want to, have the existence of viruses, be something attached. I mean, I don't think that's necessarily essential to solving the COVID situation.
Now,
well, and you really. Go ahead.
No, I just want to add one important point there, and I think we're all in agreement here. I think what's important, though, to add, just for those out there with there's a lot of people in this or 9/11 field, same thing, that are trying to manipulate the conversation, as Piers was just talking about, right? I agree with that. But for those out there with good intentions that are just being manipulated by these kind of divisions, I don't really want to even get into whether I think this is important or it's not, or it's minutia. It's relevant to me, and the point I'm making ultimately is that it comes down to whether or not you want to engage in an honest conversation about the information, right? And at the end of the day, if you're coming into it and going, you think this or you're going to be attacked, I'm not going to respond to that. Even if I want to have that conversation, you're going to drive me into going, okay, something's wrong here. Like, if you're forcing me, I'm going to immediately push back on that. I think a lot of people have that response, even though I'm over here before that conversation going like, there's something here. This is interesting. And I think that either shows that they're being manipulated into doing that by somebody who wants this conversation not to be had, or they don't want this conversation to be had. That's just my opinion. But I agree with what we're saying here. I think at the end of the day, it's about trying to find the culprit. And we can discuss, like taking 9/11, for example, the different parts of it, which you may think is absolutely paramount, and maybe you're right. But at the end of the day, if you're not willing to accept that we just may have different opinions, then you're not in this for an honest engagement, even if you think I'm wrong, right? You can ask, maybe he's being manipulated. Maybe he's an agent or maybe he's a shill. But if you don't know that, to jump to that conclusion because of a disagreement, I mean, my God, like that's a guarantee that there's never going to be any kind of actual engaged conversation going forward, which is probably the point.
Well, the whole like shill thing in alternative media can be really exhausting because it's like if you don't research exactly what another person is researching, even if you have no expertise in that field, people will label you a shill. And it can just be kind of ludicrous to a point when, okay, why don't you talk about X, Y, or Z when, it's impossible to be an expert on the geopolitics of literally every country in the world at any given time. Yeah.
I need you to get a doctoral degree in a bizarre and rare field before I will, or at least have that amount of knowledge just at the ready whenever in this, completely like very, very highly specialized area. Otherwise, you are forever going to be an establishment tool to me. Like, are you?
Yeah, so I mean, like in my case, like I've tried to specialize in certain stuff, but even then, I mean, it's hard to be an expert in everything. And I've had, personally, and I'm sure other people, this is their case too. I have young kids, I have a family, I just did a book and stuff. Like that really limits my ability to constantly be watching the news and writing about everything other people are talking about. I don't know. And some people just are pretty insistent on just dunking on other people for not covering what they're talking about, but maybe they should be more focused on making better content, because ad hominem attacks and shitting on other people isn't, necessarily great news content. You know what I mean? But I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of problems with alternative media in general. I feel like we've talked about it a lot of times,
No, I agree.
when I've been on, because I mean, there's just there's people that are really clickbaity, and then there's people who probably are manipulating people, and then there's people who are trying to make sense of stuff. And I mean, I've been doing this since 2016 full time, and what I thought about the world back in when I worked like my first 2 years at Mint Press, like 2017, 2018, I, are very different than how I feel about stuff now. Like, especially as it relates to like transnational power structures and stuff like that. A lot of that, I didn't really see that clearly until the COVID crisis, when you have, Russia and China doing the same thing as the US and Europe. They're supposed to be on different sides, but they're all following a lot of the same creepy agendas. And what does that mean, and how do we make sense of that? Like before COVID, it was harder to see that, and it was in pretty I was even in that dichotomy of it's US empire versus these guys. But now it looks like a lot of times they're essentially they definitely collaborate on certain stuff that benefits nobody, like technocracy, central bank digital currencies, and things like that. So everyone, I mean, I think it's all about intention, right? So like if you intend to try and show your audience what you're learning, you're like taking them on that journey with you. Like to assume that everyone is an automatic expert from the second they wave into alternative media about absolutely everything is a ridiculous bar that a lot of these people talking shit on social media and elsewhere will never be able to meet themselves. And it's very silly to have such unrealistic expectations. I mean, we're just like human beings, and like people like me and Ryan, like we subsist off of donations from people that read and support entirely. Like we don't have like big donors and stuff like that. And, at least from my perspective, it's just like, if you focus on doing the best content possible and having as much integrity as possible, you'll be all right, and the people will come, right, and appreciate your content and support you. But some other people obviously don't look at it that way. But at the same time, I mean, it's really hard to respond to people who have like insane expectations. And, also like on social media, like I like got a bunch of tweets telling me to like talk about some guy who I'd never heard of. And I was like, okay, who is he? And they're like, do your job, bitch, and stuff. And I'm like, can't you just tell me who he is? Or like,
do your own research, Webb.
Right.
And-
Here's an obscure screenshot with no information, and where is that? Sources? Do your own research. Like, Jesus, these people are just like,
yeah, some
how about
people
you
are
post
really
it?
extreme. But then I also asked the question on social media, like how much of these people are actually real people with like
Yeah.
that are like well-meaning readers, and how much of this is like op. Because when
Right.
you think about social media, you have no idea if someone's a real person or not. And even Elon Musk a few months ago, right, was like, oh, I don't even know if I'll buy Twitter because there's so many bots. And at least on the US military side, and we can assume every military's done this, poured millions of dollars into how to manipulate and use social media as a weapon against the public for the purpose of, well, I shared like an Ars Technica headline from like 2014 on Twitter a few weeks ago. That was basically about how the headline was something like how the US military is studying social media to see how they can use it to control people like they control drones. Right. I mean, if you can manipulate how people perceive their country, the public sentiment themselves, even if it's divorced from reality, you can control how they behave, right? Because if you manipulate perception, that translates into their behavior, how they perceive stuff, right? So
That perfectly aligns with what we were just talking about, by the way, before, right? Doesn't it, guys? I mean, that's exactly what peers, and it's like this perfect roundabout scenario. It's just, that's interesting.
well, I really feel like, even though to a large extent, like my work and a lot of other people I work with like you have to depend on social media to an extent for distributing that. I really would like to get off the big platforms as much as possible, because I feel like the more people stay on it, the more we're encouraging them to be exposed to what is essentially a giant fucking psyop. And now with stuff like Chat GPT, I mean, imagine how the bot stuff goes on Twitter, I mean,
We
can
were
be really
talking about this last week with Ryan. We showed, I think, a video or went through a few articles that were saying, what was it, Ryan? 2025, it's going to be 90%.
Oh yeah,
AI.
I'd sent that to Ryan. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah.
Buy mainstream media journalism
Yeah.
as a career. Yeah.
But
Crazy.
if we
I mean,
do,
so
go ahead, Steve. I'm so sorry.
I was going to say, I mean, and in terms of what we've been talking about, this is a slow moving project, not just because of the censorship, but because we're not selling certainty. Like there's almost every show you'll hear me or Pasta say, like, I don't know. And I'm done,
I
this
say it
is
too.
why we should keep asking
We're
questions.
not like omniscient, people just because we happen to have like a platform in the alternative media space. And I think again, goes back to like unrealistic expectations. I don't know. And I mean, like in the past, like even for me, like I've held unrealistic expectations for myself. Like, oh, I'm writing 1,000-page book and I have 2 kids, but I should be like putting out X number of articles a week still, and like pressuring myself to do that. And it's hard and it's demanding. And the fact that there's people who like hold people like us to certain standards that they'd never hold themselves to if they were in the same position. I mean, it's just silly, But I think at the same time, the human brain too has a tendency to like inflate the negative. Like I can look at an interview I did on YouTube or something, or that's posted on YouTube, and I can look at the comments and they'll be like 96% really positive, and then like I'll only remember like the negative ones.
Right.
Even though it's like pretty few. But again, like for people in government that want to like discourage us from doing what we do, they know that, and they study that, and they look at how to try and keep you from going anywhere.
Right.
So again, that's why I like to remind people that psyops go on all the time. And so with Chat GPT, right, and social media, because remember, Twitter and Chat GPT, OpenAI, Elon Musk is involved in both of those. So why would he's also a military intelligence contractor, right? Because Space Force is the military and it's also an intelligence agency. And I think he's also involved with other government agencies, if I'm not mistaken. And, how would they not want to utilize those connections for massive psyops when they've been studying social media for that explicit purpose for over a decade?
Right.
And
God,
pouring millions of dollars into it. Like they want to use it for that.
The way you describe it, it's so clearly like a right now problem. I mean, obviously, right? And so this kind of interestingly that we were just talking also with peers about just stop engaging with corporate media. So what do you think, Whitney? How do you Like, so if it's a right now problem, how do we transition that? Because the obvious point we always make is, okay, like if we just stopped using Twitter, is, you would lose that distribution that we are using it for. So where are we at?
No,
with
it's
that? Like,
complicated.
Yeah.
right.
Could I also piggyback on what he's saying too, Ryan? Because I had almost the same type of question, because you talked about getting off the big platforms, Whitney, but like, why should we exit the public square? Isn't that what it was supposed to be? The public square, even though it's a major psyop and they're hiding behind the curtain. How do we emulate that to where we can have an open discussion about ideas and what's going on and what it's pretended to be?
Yeah. So I think all we can really do is let people know the extent of the psyop that it is. So, you know how Google's been doing this thing with pre-bunking, they call it, inoculating people so they resist this information.
Yeah,
well, we should be doing that too, by telling people that social media, conventional big tech social media, is a giant fucking psyop half the time.
They
remind people that they can't know if anyone responding or posting is necessarily real or not, right? And
Google released
maybe
a freaking video game app to go along with their pre-bunking. There was a whole thing out of I think,
well, gamifying stuff is a tactic they use.
And so it's called fake news. We played it on the show a couple of years ago when it debuted, and that whole the whole pre-bunking and inoculation concept was sort of rolled out. And so we pulled it up in real time and played it, and it's like all about how to have a conspiracy Twitter page. And then so it's training people and it reads at like a, I don't know, 5th, 6th grade level. So it's teaching kids that at least that young, they're trying to get them used to spotting fake news. Like, it's wild. It is. It was. I'll send you that. I probably have it up.
But anyway, we can use that same tactic, and just with factual information, the government sees social media as a weapon, and they plan to use that weapon against you.
They see everything as a weapon.
Well, yeah, absolutely. But my point is, there's like a bunch of DARPA research and other stuff to testify to that. Right.
Wholeheartedly agree.
And a lot of other data points. And, ultimately, I think we should try, as much as, it's sort of like shooting yourself in the foot. I mean, encourage people to use different types of social media, but you can't necessarily force that change on people. You can just explain. And I guess, the more we explain, hopefully that can help sort of prevent people from, maybe if they get sucked into something, they'll pause and be like, wait a second, maybe this isn't really real, And remember that, they've been talking about stuff like deep fakes for ages. And there's all this, a lot of efforts to really divorce us from reality and have us not believe what we see and hear with like our own senses, and have it just be totally manipulated 24/7. I mean, people have to be really aware of that and like on their game about that stuff. To not fall victim to it, right? Which I think most people in this audience, right, think that they can do that. But I mean, sometimes on social media, you might forget and think you're just dealing with real people all the time, and you're definitely not. The question is, you can't really know who's who in that paradigm, right?
Question everything.
But I mean, it's sticky because it sucks to shoot your own self in the foot, in a sense, when you're trying to get like content out and stuff like that. But I don't know. I mean, you can see the damage that social media has done. I mean, Facebook, for example, right? Caught years ago manipulating people's emotions with algorithms and news feeds with the intention to make people more depressed. And there's all these studies about how teens that use social media are more depressed. And I mean, think about all the other things that we don't hear about, the impacts it's had. And even now with ChatGPT, I mean, how many people are even going to read and write anymore? They're just going to like have ChatGPT do all of that for them. And when you outsource something to technology, it's like you use it or you lose it type stuff, right? So like no one does mental math anymore because we all have calculators on the phone, right? And so what happens when you get to that point where you don't even really write anymore because you just put a prompt in ChatGPT and you copy paste, bam, bam. You start to mentally atrophy yourself. And I shared this cartoon on the Unlimited Hangout Telegram channel the other day because I found it really interesting. It was like a crowd of people like all on their phones, and then like there's a park bench and there's like two robots, and one's reading a book and the other one's like drawing stuff. Because like all the stuff that used to be like creative humans, like what's great about humanity and the creativity, the imagination, we're having robots do it for us, the AI art generation and stuff. Chat GPT. We're literally being trained to be automatons, which if you look back to like the Rockefeller family ambitions 100 years ago, like for the workforce, it was to turn people that worked in their factories into like literal robots. Right. And, you know, when you factor in how things have developed now with like transhumanism and all of that stuff, I think it's pretty clear where this is going. And then, you know, you have a complete, really, I would argue, a complete lack of coverage of this from the left at all, whether it's alternative or mainstream left, which is supposed to be working class issues. Where are they about AI and all of this stuff?
Right.
I haven't heard. I mean, it's like Marianne Williamson, Joe Biden, blah, 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 all the time. Forget party politics. Your whole working class, your whole base is about to be replaced by machines run by Silicon Valley overlords.
I swear to God, Whitney, I have seen more content and more stuff on social media in the last 3 weeks that you would think we all just got sucked into a vacuum and spit back out in 2015.
No. Well, honestly, as soon as the COVID stuff started to fade away, a lot of the people in alternative media that like had blinders on and acted like COVID like wasn't happening and never happened and there was nothing shady at all about it, all of a sudden like mentally reverted like, oh, it's 2019 again, and I'm just going to talk about all the stories I talked about then and act like nothing's happened the past 3 years. Hopefully
sad.
No one will notice.
That's sad. Hey guys, I got to jump out. I just want to give a.
You ain't got time for one more question though, while Whitney's here though, really quick about.
I got time. Go ahead. I got time.
Yeah, well, Whitney's here too as well because I want to know the you know, you've been doing a lot of the work on what's going on in Ohio, in Palestine, Ohio, and it seems like, I don't know, one of the things that really caught my eyes the most is when Steve one morning was looking at, we had a map of where the water was that this shit got in the water and how far it spreads out. And Steve's like, maybe we should kind of line up where Bill Gates bought his farmland to see if all this shit dries out. And this is the place where Z-bugs can go. What are you gathering? What's going on? I mean, I was listening to your video the other day, just amazing. I don't know how you do it for 3 hours straight, but man, so much information. It was great, especially when you were calling up the veterinarians and finding, you know, animals, you know, within 200 miles dropping dead and whatnot. What are your thoughts on what you see is happening there? Do you think this is more than just a random train spill? And then maybe, Whitney, you can dive in after that, because if we're talking fourth industrial revolution, we're talking about moving people into big cities. We're talking about eating Z-bugs. This seems like the perfect way to fucking just pollute and destroy the land so that they can pull it out from any small farmer or anything else. So go ahead, give us your opinions on that, Ryan. And you're muted. Sorry.
I think where we're at right now is it's of course, as always, we should ask these questions. Is this connected? Was it executed for a larger agenda? But I think, you know, even like the bugs and the future, all that stuff, like we're getting ahead of ourselves, in my opinion, but with what we can prove in the situation. It's a valid question. I mean, obviously, these are justifying reimagining different parts of infrastructure, just like, you know, all the stuff we get into with the, you know, Great Reset. But I don't see enough evidence to prove at this point that was like executed for that reason. It could just be falling into the category of never let a good crisis go to waste. I'm not saying I don't think we can prove one way or the other just yet, but I think it's quite obvious that this is overwhelmingly rife with corruption, dishonesty, lying, withholding information since the very beginning. And so that's where my first point, and I've said this from the beginning, is that we should be diving further into this and trying to find out if it connects to larger points and larger agendas. But we sort of missed the forest for the trees here on all sides of this, the paradigm right in the beginning, because this is a huge environmental disaster. We're still fleshing out how problematic it is, whether we're just talking about the chemicals that were buried, the vinyl chloride that was dumped on the ground and the lasting problems from that, or rather just the issues in the beginning and whether that was a problem with the air around the community, or we're talking about the burned byproducts released by the burning and what that's then done in a really far-reaching area. Or to your point, I spoke to Executive Director Teresa McGuire from the Columbiana Humane Society, and she's the one, they have verifiable tests and then also evidence from other veterinarians further away that they are poisoning. Now, she made the point that you can't confirm vinyl chloride poisoning, but these animals are being tested and they have signs of poisoning based on the test, based on their symptoms in a perfect radius around this area that go, as she pointed out, some as like 2 hours away. That they, estimating like 150, 200 miles based on how fast you go. So that's a huge reach. And these are animals that are dying, large animals that are having weird symptoms. And now we're getting to the point where people are having headaches, nausea. You have labor union workers who are reporting that they're getting sick around the area as of like a few days ago. You have animals dying in state parks. I mean, there's no way to deny that there's a problem. Right? That's happening. So I think it's important that we establish, first of all, that this is a real thing that is affecting people. And then the cover up that took place, the 10-day time frame where nobody talked about this, what was happening there, the EPA not saying to do anything, like we're now ordering you to clean this 3 weeks or 2 weeks afterward. Now we're not even testing for dioxins up for like they first even said we're going to do it like a week ago or less. Whether they have yet, I don't even see evidence of that. Like this is enough. But whether there's something bigger, again, I think that with buying out the land, that's a real thing we should look into, whether this was just done after the fact or it was executed. These are real questions, but I just don't want us to miss the real problem that's already happening that these people in Ohio right now, they're struggling, man. You talk to anybody that speaks to them, there's all sorts of stuff happening there. Addy adds, as he was there. He spoke to these people, So that's where I leave it. But yeah, I'd love to hear Whitney's thoughts on, the reaching parts of this, if she sees that. And because I agree with that.
I think Addy's going back too.
Yeah, he just said that actually, but I'm going to pop out. I just want to say one thing just to shout out in general. We on March 20th, I'm going to be doing a TLAV sort of fundraiser essentially. Whitney's going to try to make it as well. We have this window, I think between like 11 and 4, we're going to try to do like a half day kind of like telethon kind of idea. Scott and I are going to be kind of manning the desk and everyone's planning to come in.
That's a Monday, right?
I believe it's a Monday, and we've got confirmation from everybody, Whitney, Matt, Taylor, Robert, Derek. And so it'll be fun and in different times throughout the day. And so I just want to shout that out. We'll have some, interesting surprise pop-ins and so on. So more details will be coming, but I think it'll be fun. It'll be kind of a, shout out to independent media, and hopefully you guys can stop by as well. And, all that'll be a kind of fundraising for the future as well as for where we're going with everything. But thanks for having me on, guys. Always love it. Always love Tuesdays.
Thank you.
Bye, Ryan.
Always great to see you, Whitney. Bye, guys.
Likewise.
Ryan Christian, thelastAmericanVagabond.com. Do that. Do that.
I think at the very best, though, the best case scenario, it is just the a terrible corporation and the government doing what they normally do, just covering up for these corporations that keep feeding their money.
I think East Palestine might have been different in some aspects, but if you think about it, over the past 20 years, there's been an insane amount of like chemical spills and all sorts of crazy stuff, and it never gets talked about. So like, for example, I wrote, I think in 2017 or 2018 for Mint Press about how the military was the biggest polluter in the world, the US military. And I started off that article talking about how there was this massive fuel spill on this military base that caused it was like one of the biggest ever. Got no coverage. So, like the East Palestine thing obviously got a lot of coverage. And that's good in the sense that like people around the country are aware of it, but this stuff goes on all the time. And a lot of time it doesn't get coverage. The US is like literally covered in what are called Superfund sites, which are like heavily toxic sites recognized by the EPA. A lot of them do happen to be military bases. And there's a lot of like military bases where military families live that have like totally poisoned water just as bad, if not worse, than stuff going on in like Flint, Michigan for years and years. And Flint was never fixed, right? And that got a lot of like coverage and a lot of public awareness was raised about it, but no one was really held accountable. And nothing was really done. And so, as a consequence of that, you have events where these things happen. And more often than not, a lot of the public interest in this stuff turns out to be, rubbernecking, basically. Like, when you are driving down the interstate and there's like a gnarly crash and, there's a traffic jam, but the traffic jam is because everyone's like slowing down to look at the wreckage and be like, holy crap. But they're not going to do anything about it, right? So I think, a lot of about East Palestine is like, oh, look at all these people getting sick and this mushroom cloud and all this stuff going wrong, but is that going to translate into people like demanding a new Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act that doesn't have a bunch of the Dick Cheney Halliburton loopholes from the early 2000s and stuff?
Or how about like money for railroads in our infrastructure bill to to fix all our fucking railroads, which to me is the
Yeah.
number one problem anyways. But
Well, I think they want to justify they want to have the railroads totally dilapidated so they can come in and like have some sort of like fourth industrial revolution, high speed rail thing to shutter people around. Yeah, I mean, because a lot of this stuff, you know, with the 4IR, there's a lot of stuff about transportation that they want to fundamentally alter, you know, like ending private car ownership and a lot of this other stuff, having like fleet sharing stuff. So for long distance travel, you know, it's been sort of passed around this idea of a particular type of rail system in the US, but I don't really think it would necessarily be better given the people that are making plans for it. But I definitely think what you're saying, if the government was sane, would make a lot of sense. But unfortunately, it's not. I mean, Pete, you know, Mayor Pete is the head of this, you know, the transportation, you know, ministry or Department of Transportation in the States.
We were having
there.
And this correlates. We were having a discussion on Union of the Wanted last night about the role that Rhodes Scholars have played in the direct destabilization of the United States, and Pete Buttigieg is a Rhodes Scholar, and it's just kind of there's this whole direct line of, and according to the program, what they want to do is give people Cecil Rhodes ideology and then send them back to their respective countries and have them, destabilize them from the inside out and return them to Mother England.
Yeah. We've published stuff about that on Unlimited Hangout before, specifically about Rhodes Scholars. More often than not, it seems like they've sort of been in recent years overly represented in Democratic administrations. So Clinton, Obama, and now Biden. And yeah, there's a lot of them serving some sort of purpose. Obviously, you know, these Rhodesian scholars, a lot of them are tied up with groups like Chatham House and the Council on Foreign Relations, which of course themselves are interrelated entities. And the Rhodes Scholars almost always promote those foreign policy talking points from those entities, which basically function, you know, as part of a shadow government for policy setting and stuff like that in the States. So, you know, complicated stuff, obviously.
There's and to Pasta's earlier point though about what's going on in East Palestine, regardless of whether or not this is a planned thing, it is super weird that there were extras in a movie where this sort of exact thing
really
happens.
Weird.
They had a digital ID pilot program issued.
And you know
COVID.
what else is happening in Ohio? Carbine 911 is about to take over their 911 system. That's got no coverage.
Well, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And then there have been a number of other derailments and explosions and accidents in Ohio
since then,
all around.
There's been 2 in Florida. There was one, I think, in like Michigan or something outside Detroit. I mean, this, like I was saying earlier, this stuff actually happens a lot more than people think. And I think the East Palestine one got a lot more coverage than these things normally do. And of course, the movie White Noise and the extra stuff, how it was filmed there, it was the same thing. I mean, that definitely raises a lot of eyebrows. But again, I think it's going to be some time, like Ryan said, before we exactly know if there was some sort of, you know, operational angle here in terms of influencing what happened with this particular train derailment. And I want to rule it out. But ultimately, you know, I think for people looking down that rabbit hole, I guess it would make sense to look if there's any sort of clauses for acquiring land or eminent domain policy as it relates to contaminated land, and if people are just going to experience massive land theft. But I also want to point out this particular area, which is like on the Ohio-Pennsylvania border, that area has been heavily fracked for a really long time and heavily polluted already as a result of that, right? So I think people have sort of forgotten to mention that. I mean, a lot of the Rust Belt, specifically where there's all this natural gas, the shale gas deposit, I forget exactly what it's called, but it's all under like Pennsylvania, Ohio, that part of the U.S. Have been getting totally screwed by those policies for decades now. and they're just getting screwed anymore. And no one on the policy level is even talking about like Clean Water, Clean Air Act. And remember, fracking and a lot of this other stuff is because government policies that existed to prevent this kind of stuff have been changed without people knowing about it. So you have like what I mentioned earlier, like the loopholes about fracking, like a lot of the policy in the Clean Air and Water Act doesn't apply to the oil and gas industry, thanks to the George W. Bush administration. I mean, a lot of people in regular America have no idea that's a policy. And then with this particular train derailment, you have the fact that it should have been labeled as hazardous material, but because of lobbying from the company involved, less regulation, it was not labeled as such, right? So I don't know. It's just, I think, unfortunately, it's being used as sort of political point scoring, like with, Trump's McDonald visit stuff there. I mean, he's perfectly content to poison people in East Palestine with his COVID vaccine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
So, I just think it's, unfortunate. And the people that are the ultimate losers are the people that live there. And, we're not doing them any favors by, speculating about stuff we can't know for sure. I mean, you can raise up the point that there'll probably be land grabs at some point because,
Yeah.
I mean, the U.S. government's been doing it for a long time. Like eminent domain issues have been going on a really long time. People that were familiar with a lot of the battles about pipelines in the mid and Midwestern US will be pretty familiar with eminent domain, and the government can just come in and like steal your land and do whatever they want to it. And they're just like, screw you. And I mean, if they want to do that with contaminated land or whatever, I mean, the government has a track record of doing that. Why wouldn't they do it at some point? And I think it's pretty clear there's been a lot of attacks on the American food supply and the infrastructure for processing food and getting it from one place to another, an insane amount of food waste and all of that stuff. And, I mean, if you wanted to force people into mega cities, which are being built, I mean, that's not a conspiracy theory. You have to
Right.
make it so unattractive for them to homestead or have their own land somewhere. And if you do that through mass pollution and contamination, or you do it by other means, I mean, the end goal is ultimately the same.
Well, and
right?
here's the other side to this, because you had mentioned earlier about military polluting their own land and then forcing
Yeah.
people to live on it and on their own land, whatever. The military will pollute anywhere and everywhere. There was the Red Hill incident in Hawaii not too long ago. To the flip side of that is the majority Koch brother owned Colonial Pipeline gas spill that wound up being the largest gasoline spill in U.S. history. Was over
Basically
$1 million.
memory hold for most people.
100%, because right as the accountability report was due, they got their cyber hack and they were held by cyber ransom, where they just decided not to pay people for a little bit. It was the whole thing.
Yeah, because it wasn't even a real ransomware attack. It was like they weren't sure if the billing software was working. So, and that was it. Yeah, it's pretty silly.
And then just to kind of to solidify that point, what's going on in East, if you look at it in terms of the areas of land that are being, let's face it, destroyed, how many of those can then immediately fall under the federal government's jurisdiction for habitat restoration, to where even if you're not doing it by eminent domain land grab, you'd be like, well, this was a protected wetland, so we have to restore it. It's going to be a 20-year project. And while we're doing that, we'll let you visit it digitally for a fee. But you could be there in
something like
reality.
that. I mean, I think a lot of these policies we're likely to see more as the Sustainable Development Goals are translated into U.S. policy by the Biden administration. Because a lot of this stuff justifies it as being quote unquote green has nothing to do with the environment at all. It has to do with entrenching the oligarchy's power. And I think that's pretty evident. So like a good example, the Green Bank in the US, if you've heard of it, it's supposed to like free up, indirect capital for SDG stuff or environmental conservation and whatever, but it tends to go towards SDG lined up stuff. The guy they decided to put on has no expertise in climate stuff or environmental anything. He's the former CEO of MasterCard. Okay,
Yeah.
sounds like a guy who really cares about saving the planet, guys.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just it's silly, you know. And if you look at the people who are running environmental policy for the UN, Mike Bloomberg, Mark Carney, where is the left, dude? I mean, my view is like, it doesn't matter if you think climate change is an existential threat or you think it's all a bunch of hooey. The people that are in charge of the solutions are crazy Wall Street predators. And like no one complains about it. Except I guess on the right, but usually like for the wrong reasons, you know.
Yeah, because it's not their crazy fucking predator. And once their crazy predator gets in, they'll make excuses for that person too. That's the sick thing. And the left, there is no left in America. The left is pretty much, they have CIA, ex-head of CIAs on their TV shows giving advice. So they're gone. And it's just, it's nuts. Sad. When you say, where is the fucking left? I don't know.
Well, it's just like, I don't know. I mean, a lot of it, I don't even understand anymore, like why certain things are ignored and glossed over and just not talked about by a lot of these bigger platforms. And they're acting like it's still 2015. Like you said, Steve, it just doesn't make any sense at all to me.
Let's not bring Marianne Williamson into this right now.
No, I'm done. I don't even want to talk about her. Like, what's the point? Yeah. Don't even like give that woman the time of day. I like don't need to spend any energy on her.
I've been intrigued on the other side. The guy
solid advice, boys and girls. Solid advice from your friend and mine, Whitney Webb. In fact, if you listen to nothing else today, nothing else.
I know.
Take this to heart, take this to head, put it in a fun bit. I don't care. Just make sure you carry it with you as you go forward.
Don't take it out over
pretty
here.
Much. Right? But I mean, feed the dying system all you want. By 2024, I mean, we're on our way to the gulag, dude. It doesn't really matter who's going to get in and be inaugurated the end of January 2025.
They were telling me on Union last night that you predicted an internet collapse within the next 2 years, and I was wondering if you would like to expound on that.
Well, I wrote a series about this for TLAV. Let's see. I have it up now. I published it, I think, April 2021. In July 2021 was the second bit. Let me see if I can find the particular article on it. That made me want to bring it up again. It's about the Webb Partnership Against Cybercrime, if you're familiar, which is basically run by an ex-Mossad guy who's just totally
me and
insane.
Jones dug into that pretty heavy.
Yeah, when I wrote about it. So basically, there and some other reports that are affiliated with the Webb Partnership Against Cybercrime, which is essentially the DOJ, the FBI, UK, and Israeli intelligence, and then the Wall Street banks, say that there's going to be a catastrophic ransomware attack that takes down the financial system. And I'll put this article that's more recent here in the chat so you guys can share it. With the Rockfin chat or something. I'll just put it here on the StreamYard chat because I don't have Rockfin open or anything. It says a catastrophic mutating event will strike the world in 2 years, report says. Yeah. And let's see. And it says a World Economic Forum report says from managing director of the WEF, Jeremy Jurgens, which is like the top guy there basically after Schwab. He said it's basically predicting there's going to be a massive cyber attack within the next 2 years. And if you look at, Johnny and I did past reporting on Cyber Polygon and all of this stuff. And this series I'm talking about from 2021 is born out of that. They basically say that the plan is once there's going to be a giant ransomware attack that takes down the financial system. The ransomware element they're going to use to justify ending financial anonymity entirely, and they're going to use it to illegalize Bitcoin. I mean, that's pretty clear. And you already have a top guy in the Biden administration after this particular article was out saying the same thing. Bitcoin has to be eliminated because it will drive ransomware attacks and there'll be all this cybercrime. And they also want to link your internet access to a government issued ID. So in the current paradigm, it's going to be digital ID. But this is an idea that goes back to the Obama administration, the idea of the driver's license. for the
Mhm.
internet, right? And there's been recent big pushes on that front in the UK and also the European Union, and
Australia.
and all the white paper, like policy papers for digital ID in the years leading up to COVID were all about linking digital ID to your social media and internet activity in general. So how do you get all of that in one fell swoop and also manage your controlled demolition of the financial system to enter in the CBDC?
Yeah.
Ransomware, cyber attack on the banks, and in these, I'll link my old reports in here so you guys can people can read it that are interested. And I'm hoping to do a video on it maybe this week or next week to remind people about some of this research because it's still very relevant. Yeah. They basically just game it out, and one of the top entities gaming it out is this. It's called FISAC, which is a financial. It's like information sharing and analysis center. So there's all these different ISACs. There's one for election infrastructure, which you might be interested in looking at, Pasta, because there's a lot of shady people on that are basically managing election infrastructure during elections in the U.S. So, if you're worried about election manipulation, they're guys to look at. But there's one for the big banks too that's called FISAC. And it's, like the top people at JP Morgan and Wells Fargo and Bank of America, blah, blah, blah. And they, in the same time frame that the WEF Partnership Against Cybercrime, which they're also members of, were writing about this imminent cyber attack on the banks that's going to happen at some point. FSISAC is training for it, basically saying it's inevitable. And now you have, just a couple days ago, the top guy at the WEF under Schwab saying it's going to happen in the next 2 years. And you look at some of these other policy documents tied up with the WEF Partnership Against Cybercrime. So the WEF Partnership Against Cybercrime wrote a policy paper with the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, their cybersecurity policy unit. They teamed up, and their whole time frame talking about this stuff, which they did in conjunction with all the big central banks, right? And big commercial banks. The timeline is 2021 to 2024. So, and I'm not the only one that's predicted some sort of cyber 9/11. James Corbett's been there too, because they've basically created policy for it. The question is, when do they do it? I don't really know. But you have, the people right in the middle of it being like, within the next 2 years. I don't know. And it's all, they need to control the internet more than they do now. And the only way they can get away with that is by having some sort of event that they can use to manufacture consent for the complete regulation and surveillance of everything anyone does at the internet at any given time. And they've been trying to sort of do it in a sort of a soft core way, right? Hate speech has to be regulated and all this stuff, but they haven't been able to push the needle.
Misinformation is
here's a ridiculous dinner theater Mary Poppins who's going to be the disinformation czar. You buy that, right? Everybody accepts this, right? We're all going to run with it. Yeah, no.
But if you look at those two particular reports I did and you read those policy documents themselves, it's very clear what they're setting up for. And the WEF Partnership Against Cybercrime, this is the entity that did Cyber Polygon, dude. And that teamed up with like the Russian government. They're teamed up with the Department of Justice and the FBI. UK intelligence and Israeli intelligence. It's run by a former Israeli spy who created the Israeli National Cyber Directorate and created a bunch of insane cybersecurity policies under Netanyahu, where basically it gave Israeli intelligence free reign to use any Israeli tech company as a front for their intelligence operations.
Hooray.
So that's the ultimate public-private partnership, dude. No wonder he got put in charge of this thing at the WEF, right? Intelligence agents, front companies. What better way to bring the public, the intelligence agency, and the front company together? Public-private partnership. It's crazy. So if who's most likely to commit some sort of crazy act of cybercrime? The U.S. government and Israel, because think of all the big hacks, right? Think about WikiLeaks Vault 7. Think about Stuxnet and all of that stuff. Who are the hackers that do this kind of shit? It's Israel and the US every time.
Is there going to be a way to go underground around it? You know what I'm saying? Like the underground
here's the
internet
thing.
or something like that?
When this attack happens, in order to get back on the internet after, they're going to be like, well, that was so bad, wasn't it? This cyber pandemic or whatever they're going to call it. I mean, they fielded all these terms for it over the years. You know, once it happens, the internet will come back, but it won't be like the internet is now. Everyone will be 100% surveilled all the time. So, you know, there's no anonymity anymore. So there's no like shit posting or people doing crazy stuff or whatever. Like, you know, it's all going to be super monitored. It's going to be bland as fuck, for one thing. It's also going to be way more censored. And a lot of content that's here right now isn't going to be there when it comes back. So the answer to that is to save everything that is valuable to you offline in a hard drive. Yeah. And you can buy like Faraday bags on Amazon, like put your hard drives in there for, you know, extra layer of security, I guess. But I mean, people got to stock up in this knowledge, you know, the information on the internet, whether it's about historical events or like traditional skills or homesteading or stuff you want to learn or whatever. If the internet's shut off, like, or your music, like, don't be dependent on Spotify if you want to listen to music. Have hard copies of stuff. It's really important. And a lot of people have become really dependent on streaming for their media or their music. And also, you know, like YouTube for how tutorials about how to do stuff, right? And if you think you'll need certain stuff when the internet might not be there someday, make sure that's all like you have it backed up, you know. And maybe someday people will make like an alternative, a parallel internet.
I'm going to crows. I'm going back to fucking crows. I'm going to write shit down, get the crow.
You mean carrier pigeons?
Yes. But like Game of Thrones crows. Like, you know.
Oh,
Steve, did you get my crow? Whitney, I sent you a crow.
Okay, yeah.
No, because the crow saw some shiny shit on the way, got distracted, decided to hang out. No, this is why we use the pigeons, because you can program them. You just got to open them up a little bit and put your own SIM card in.
Oh, Jesus, Steve. Come on now.
Yeah, have you ever seen a baby
bunch
pigeon?
Of Neuralink pigeons.
Yeah. Go there. Dude, I'm going to play a video of the robot dogs with the strippers on the stage again if you don't stop, you know, talking about this stuff.
The robot strippers are so just...
The robot dogs.
It makes me so uncomfortable on so many levels. I don't even like strippers like to begin with, like that, you know. I mean, it's just I don't dig a strip club, so you put robots in it. I'm like, right? I'm all the way out. You couldn't even talk me into it for Ty's bachelor party. No. If they drop robot strippers wherever Ty ends up going, dude, no, I'm not. I'm out. I'm not doing it. I thought we were going to shoot guns in the desert, buddy. We had a plan, you know.
Yeah, but there's a strip club on the way to the desert. I had to stop.
There really is, man. No matter.
There's no robot dogs there. There are $1 Pabst Blue Ribbons though, so we'll be fine. You know.
Wow.
Crazy. Well, the robot dogs are there for when people figure out that all their jobs are about to be eliminated by artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
They had them on stage for the pre-Super Bowl party dancing and whatnot. It's like they're just normalizing.
They're your friends.
Yeah.
Until they have the gun mount that we've also seen.
They had, you know? Also as part of the backdrop to that was this like weird, you know, AI human-esque thing on both sides of it going out. The whole thing was just sort of a dedication to the transhumanist future.
Yeah, well, we're in this stage right now where there's an effort to dehumanize actual humans and then humanize machines. Right. Absolutely. And so what you're talking about is a part of that. And it's just going to get crazier. It already started years ago. Remember when Mohammed bin Salman gave Sophia the robot citizenship?
Mm-hmm.
Which, oddly enough, remember who MBS? Remember when Jeffrey Epstein was arrested and there were a bunch of pictures of Mohammed bin Salman in his house when it was raided? And like no one talks about that. And then he even like Epstein said that he used to talk to Mohammed bin Salman all the time. And Mohammed bin Salman was like texting Kushner like teenagers and all this weird stuff. Yeah. And very obviously involved in that orbit. Well, Sophia the robot was basically created by a scientist that was almost entirely bankrolled by Epstein, named Ben Goertzel. So who do you think sort of made that happen? The Sophia the robot citizen. I think it's pretty clear, which was all part of his Vision 2030 thing, which wonder who came up with that too.
Is there any new revelations with these? I mean, from what I understand, it just seemed like an old list got recycled from 2019, but people made videos on it. One dude made a video, and Jim Carrey is suing that dude for making a video for everybody.
Well, yeah, because that isn't an actual list of people that went to the island. It's just a bunch of Hollywood celebrities. It has like Oprah and Miley Cyrus on it and stuff like that.
What list
and
was that? Just that people who were on the plane
it's like a QAnon thing that went around the internet. I mean, there's a bunch of grift and Epstein research, obviously. So like there's the people who were like, oh, the client list is definitely coming out every time there's like a redaction in this court case between Ghislaine Maxwell and Virginia Giuffre. And like nothing new was ever revealed, and it's never at the client list. But people are like, client list is going to be out. Oh my God. And then it never comes out. You know what I mean?
What were they putting videos out on? You're saying it's just a QAnon fucking
I didn't see the video you're talking about, but like there's no evidence that like
about Jim 5 or 6 people made videos, like, you know,
yeah, probably because it was this lit. I mean, I saw it being circulated on social media, but it's obviously bunk, you know. Yeah. If you bother to look into it, like if you look at the flight logs and like the other stuff where you can actually tell who did go to the island and who didn't, none of those names are there. So again, it's like misdirection. So like if you can be like, you know, if Jim Carrey can sue and be like, oh, all these people talking about the people on Epstein Island, like they're liars and I've proven it in court, then they won't take people like me seriously. And I'm actually doing fact-based stuff because there's a bunch of people like, ooh, Epstein in Hollywood, Oprah was there. There's no evidence for that.
The next one.
Why don't you talk about Bill Gates? There's evidence for that. But you know.
And the last list, they were talking Tom Hanks, Colbert.
There's no evidence for that.
All those.
Maybe, but there's no evidence. And no one supplied evidence. They're just like, look at this meme that's gone around.
Yeah.
Well, that's the problem with the Twitter files being considered journalism, is that you see a screenshot now and people are like, oh, well, it must be true. That's one of the more, I guess, nefarious consequences.
Isn't it crazy how we went from WikiLeaks to that? You're muted.
Right when they dropped, that was one of the first things that
WikiLeaks. Look at the emails, look at the source documents.
Are you trying to piss Steve off right now?
I was getting shit on from people who were like, "Oh, give it a chance." Blah blah blah. You're just
the information is good.
Isn't it enough that, dude, they're not going to tell you anything that hasn't already been.
You know what's totally insane about the Twitter files thing now is that there's people like, I guess, Jonathan Cook. I'm not super familiar with him, but he's been around for a while. He wrote this piece being like, the Twitter files revealed that the national security state and social media collude. And I was like, people like me and Alan McLeod, I know for a fact, have been writing about that since like 5 years ago. It's like a major theme of all of my work ever. How did that come from the Twitter files? It's just like erasing all the stuff we did now. Like Facebook is basically a DARPA cutout, and the Google was made by the CIA. Is all of this irrelevant to people like Matt Taibbi in the context of what he's reporting on? It really shouldn't be. And the Google CIA connection, like, it's not like you even have to cite people like me. You can cite people like Nafez Ahmed, who used to write for The Guardian and stuff, and is like very mainstream adjacent. Why can't he do that? Well, I think I know why. And I'm probably just warning you and your audience, going to probably be in a gnarly fight with Mr. Matt Taibbi in the coming weeks, because I wrote an op-ed for Bitcoin Magazine about 9/11 gatekeepers.
I'm so looking forward to that. And please do drop in to discuss it in detail after you.
Well, I don't know. I think it comes out in print before it goes on their website, but it's a pretty big publication, and big shots have been fired. Yeah. Well, here's why I did it though. They asked me, their issue is called is about gatekeepers. They asked me to write something about it. And so how do you think of gatekeepers? To me, I think there's a couple different categories really of gatekeepers, but the one I think is the most nefarious are the people who use ad hominem to tell you not to look into something. Right? Because if they go, everyone that looks into this line of inquiry is a dickwad or an idiot or a piece of shit. That implies, if you look into that stuff, you are also all of those things. Right?
Yeah.
So it's different than someone like, I don't know, Aaron Matei, who on a panel on propaganda a few years ago said that it was leads to dangers to look into certain lines of 9/11 inquiry. He's saying like it's dangerous, right? And I would argue that's more like motivated out of careerism, personally. But like if you look at someone like Matt Taibbi, how he talks about not just 9/11, but also like not believing the official narrative about the Kennedy assassination and stuff like that. You're an insane person. You're a dickwad. That's what he called Jason Burness a few years ago. Yeah. Just for not believing the official story. You can be like, I understand that some people don't want to touch it at all. I'm not like that, right? Because I think personally that's, leaning towards cowardice. But if you can't talk about something that monumental and it's clearly not irrelevant to where we are today. But, some people might want to be like, well, I've never looked into it and I don't want to report on that because it could, whatever.
Yeah.
But that's very different than being like, you're a fucking idiot if you bother to not believe or consider doubting the official government narrative. At the same time, when you're being like, oh yeah, they totally lied about the Iraq war. And they lied about this and they lied about that, but not 9/11. You're a dickwad if you think that,
not COVID either.
Yeah, same deal. So,
Matt Taibbi should watch tomorrow's
intellectually
show.
I think that's intellectually dishonest.
It is. It's not only intellectually dishonest, it promotes a lazy nature in all of the journalists that emulate those people.
And the Twitter files too. It was like this big generated hype. A bunch of people back on Twitter because Emperor Elon will fix everything. Yeah. And then you have, it's Matt Taibbi, but then it's also Barry Weiss who times it to launch her new thing. And gets like a bunch of paid subscribers instantly. And now Matt Taibbi's making over $1 million on Substack,
and
like a
dude from the Intercept too. Wasn't he was a part of something.
He had a deal with Substack for a bunch of money.
There was another one too that I want to say,
Lee
and
Fang?
I can't. That's it, Lee Fang.
Mm-hmm.
Get your Intercept lackeys right, pal.
Michael Schellenberger got access to this stuff, and he's running
and now
for
they
political
get
office.
So like look at someone like Alex Berenson, right? Got a bunch of cred because he challenged certain COVID narratives, and now he's like, if you don't hate Vladimir Putin, you are a horrible person and an idiot and what I mean, it's sort of like there's been an intentional elevation of certain characters who almost all of them that we've been talking about at one point or another were relatively mainstream adjacent, if not mainstream, become elevated with this anti-establishment cred for certain things, but at the same time, they have historical antecedents in their career where they've obviously acted in a very gatekeepy way, or in Barry Weiss's case, basically worked as the lobbying arm of a foreign government.
Pretty much. And it's the sheep herding too, as well. Like they agree with you. The whole the Steve Bannon sphere, right? Like they're there on the COVID stuff. They're putting people on like James Rakuski on their show. They were great when it came to election stuff. People like Garland Favorito got on, but then they just take you to this whole way, them and the Pacifics. Hey, let's go to war with China. And unless you looking at China as the problem.
Let me talk about that for a second. Yeah. So I tweeted earlier today about this like Cop City protest, and I didn't really, I was retweeting something that Steven Donziger put out. So I wasn't really familiar with the protest at all. And people were like, Donziger's claim was like, oh, they've been labeled domestic terrorists and they've been arrested. That's bad. Right. And then there were a bunch of people in the comments being like, Antifa terror army, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. Okay. So left and right, if you're on the left, January 6th, domestic terrorist. Doesn't matter if there's a bunch of feds in there and whatever. They're all domestic terrorists. Throw the book at them. Okay, on the right. Antifa, all terrorists. Throw the book at all their left-leaning protests. Destroy them. Okay, so both sides, whether it's like Antifa or January 6th, there's feds in it, right? But basically what you're having there is both sides of the political divide being set up to support liberty-destroying domestic terror policy, when it's the opposite guy. But once those policies are on the book, it doesn't matter what party's in office, they're going to fuck you up. Right? And it's the same thing with the rhetoric on Russia and China. Left, destroy Russia. the right. Destroy China. How convenient, because Russia and China are allied, dude. So, you know, it's like people on the right being like, I'm anti-China, but I'm pro-Putin, you know? They're allied, retard. Like, what's it gonna do? What good is it gonna do for you to like
Whitney Webb
cheerlead
uses
the best
retard on
friend
your
of the guy you
show.
supposedly hate? Like, and the same, you know, ditto for the people on the left. I mean, it just doesn't work, right? And you know, to Caitlin Johnstone's credit, she did like a piece or of, I don't know, a while ago, being like, with some meme of like, you know, left being like anti-Russia and the right being anti-China, and the CIA's they're like, yes, my pretties, like, yeah,
Yes.
that's fair. That's fair, because ultimately, like, they want to lead us into some, you know, America destroying World War III event. And if you have to have both of the whole, as much of the country as you can, rabidly anti-China or anti-Russia, because they're teamed up. They're obviously allied. Like,
They have an alliance that has their own central bank.
and even more than that, now they have like Brazil, you know, the BRIC stuff.
Yeah, that's
Russia
what
and
I'm
China
saying.
is
BRICS has their
It's
own
not
central
just
bank
Russia
now,
China.
and
Yeah.
and
Saudi Arabia wants to join BRICS. So woo.
Yeah, but I think the move to BRICS is like intentionally a calculated transition, so that the
Yeah.
controlled demolition of unipolarity and then moving
Gotcha.
it to multipolarity. Multipolar could be a better system, but Russia and China specifically have made it very clear that they basically want to, you know, the UN Agenda 2030 Sustainable Development Goals all the way. We just want a bigger stake at the table, but keep the table. You know, it's like, okay, so the unipolar world order is basically the US running everything. Okay, so we'll keep the same system, but now instead of one power base, there's the 5 BRICS countries. I mean, is that really necessarily a better system? You know, because remember, all of these BRICS countries, we're all in for COVID tyranny. They're all in for the 4th industrial revolution crazy shit. So, you know, how different is it ultimately going to be at the end of the day with them in charge? Like,
well, you will get healthcare based on your social credit as opposed to how much is in your bank account. So that'll be a little different.
yeah.
Just a
Well, here's
little
the
bit.
thing too. So like a lot of people like to act like China's, you know, challenges corporations, and the government isn't beholden to corporations. You know, maybe that's so, but look how China is for workers, you know. There's very little environmental regulations. They have major pollution problems. Their environmental regulations are even worse than they are in the US, right? There's a lot of worker exploitation that happens in China that doesn't happen here in other countries. The situation may be bad in the States, but it's not necessarily better in China. So, you know, ultimate corporate control or not, there's a lot of exploited workers over there, and there's a massive domestic surveillance apparatus. Is that the system we want to get behind as the alternative? I don't think so. And I certainly don't see that system as it exists in China today as being communist.
No.
It's just, you know, more state planned capitalism, I guess, more
Mao was a
central planning and
Rockefeller.
capitalism.
Mao was a Rockefeller project anyway.
Well, yeah, that's definitely been alleged, but I think the claim is that the Rockefeller sort of came in the 70s, and I forget exactly who was in power at that particular time. It's been a while. But also, there's an interesting claim about how Mao, before he came to power in China, ran a newspaper, and it was financed by Yale University, which is interesting. But a lot of these guys, you know,
there was an Oxford connection to that too, that newspaper.
Yeah, there may be. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, a lot of, even so, whether it's US founders or founders of any other state, there's a massive tendency to sort of turn stories about them into sort of like mythology, you know?
Mhm.
And a lot of that isn't necessarily true. So like in the States, you know, you've like George Washington and the cherry tree story. It's not true.
Yeah.
It never happened, but it gets like propagated, and there's this sort of like mythical aura around stories involving George Washington. And that happens in every state.
Yeah.
It's called civil religion. It's the religion of the state. And so, you know, the people sort of fall into that sometimes. And ultimately, I think it's kind of silly. And if you want to talk about like workers' rights and stuff, I mean, if the unipolar order with the U.S. and Europe and the BRICS countries are all on board with exploiting people and replacing you with AI and all that stuff, like, how can you think that's better? I just don't see it
There
personally.
isn't a single one of them arguing against a digital
But they don't
ID.
talk about it. They act like it's not a thing. And that's what I find so crazy. Like, if you actually care about workers' rights, why can't you talk about how AI is about to take everyone's jobs?
Because okay, and this might be like surface level and stupid. It might be, but because we are, Whitney, and because there's people on the right that talk about it, and it first and foremost, you align with what the ideology says, and if the ideology says you're against these people, then your reactionary duty is to pretend that this shit isn't going on. Or if you do
Yeah.
talk about it, you couch it in vague terms of, well, that's capitalism and these greedy capitalists. And they never acknowledge that the countries that they're trying to emulate are on the exact same path. They don't
Well,
give a fuck. They don't.
the
Go ahead.
the crazy thing to me also about in like current leftist rhetoric, at least as it's seen like on social media and online and in general, they just seem to forget that the corrupt corporations own the state and run everything in the state. So if the corrupt corporations are your enemy and you're like, well, the answer is to give more money and power to the state, don't you realize that it's like so beyond corrupted by those same corporations that like you're just basically giving it to the corporations you're saying are corrupt?
And then
I don't
there's
know.
some vague nonsense about, oh, well, we'll just abolish corporations and replace them with worker-owned cooperatives. And it's like, through what mechanism? Because we just talked about how this
You'll just
entity
be
is
labeled a
owned by,
terrorist group by the US government and shot up.
I
You'll
mean,
be Waco'd.
yeah,
I don't want to just jump
Yeah.
into a conversation. I just walked in like Donnie in the last, excuse me, in what's our movie, The Big Lebowski. Donnie, you're like a child wandering in a movie. But I think the thought process of that, though, of understanding that the corporations are running stuff and saying we the people want to run this stuff. I mean, there is something positive about that, is there not? I mean, when you talked about the question, if we have 5 countries at the table running as opposed to 1, I think that's way better. I mean, I'm not saying that's the end solution, but I think
Okay,
that's
yeah,
way
but
better when
what
you
if
have more
all
voices involved.
5 of those countries get their policy set by think tanks that are mainly in the West?
Here's the thing. At the end of the day, no matter what, it's going to be up to the individuals of their own countries to get a hold of their government one day down the road, or abolish it or whatever, or get that
Yeah.
seat at the table. So no matter what, but even still, if there was still 5 voices, let's say, and like 2 of the 5 voices, then they break away from the West mentality and all the elites and the oligarchs, then we would have some sort of fighting chance. And I think it would spell some type of unity for the world and people to come together.
Yeah,
I
but
don't have the answers at all. I'm just,
I know, but
looking
here's
at the
where
silver lining.
here's where
Yeah.
this doesn't really work for me. So take like the WHO, the World Health Organization power grabs going on right now. Okay.
Yes.
And insane man Jeremy Farrar, soon to be chief scientist of the WHO, declares a public a health emergency of concern. Russia, China, India, and South Africa, all on board with the WHO. So is the US, so is Europe. I mean, they're all going to sign it. So at the end of the day, if they want to do some sort of biosecurity crazy power grab again, BRICS isn't going to stop them. Right? And they support that type of like top-down national control system. So if they support that and that type of system is put into place, how much power then really does any one BRICS country have to at some point pull away if they don't agree with the policy? If they do support these supranational organizations that would be on top of BRICS anyway.
Yeah.
So instead of the US being the ultimate seat of power,
Yeah.
visibly, you have maybe BRICS, but you also have the implementations of these supranational things like from the UN. Where's the UN headquartered? New York City.
No, I mean, and I look at it too as well as not this one's the better one. Let's take the lesser of the 2 evils. I'm like, which system, which are we moving to that gives us a better fighting chance? You know, like there is some form of
Yeah, but I
belief
think
that
you're fighting chance and like national governments of countries that are far away from you and me doesn't really make as much sense as getting local and trying to make a
it doesn't
parallel
show me the
system.
way. It doesn't like show me the way. Like we see it happening, and then we can sometimes try to emulate it. I mean, I don't know. I'm looking for silver lining over here, and I don't
As
know.
as a man of culture and senior Gomez wrangler, I look forward to the opportunity to ask for my digital prison in Portuguese or in Russian or in Chinese. That will, I mean, the opportunity and the diversity and the equity that it provides is the kind of sustainable future that I'm looking
Yes.
for.
And tell us your suggestion then. Go. Hold on.
I have been the
Hold
entire
on. No,
time.
no, no, no. You don't get to be sarcastic and then
No, I
don't
mean
come
the
in with an
entire time
answer.
that
You don't
I've been
shit
on
on
the
one side and
the
then
entire
not
time
present
that I've been
another,
on the
Steven.
air for years
I got
now,
you big here.
we've talked about this. We talked about it at the beginning of the show with Dr. Pierce
Little
Robinson.
parallel
We talked
societies.
about
I
it
get
about
it.
halfway
I
through.
know.
There is a systemic economic war that we need to wage against central banks. I have been incredibly clear about this. And alongside of that, there are parallel structures that do need to be established. There's a lot of communication that needs to take place. I've also said multiple times that I don't even know if this can happen until we collectively heal. But I
Steven,
mean, there's a
I'm
lot
not.
of what we can't do. What we can't do is continue to pretend like giving more time, more money, more resources, more energy to pedophilic sociopaths is a fantastic idea. That's what we can't do.
Yeah. And I get you, and I am not disagreeing what not with you. What I'm saying is that how first of all, we don't have the answers, right? So when we talk about it in a certain way, we say, well, this idea is kind of stupid and shit on it without presenting it in a proper way. We lose the message, right? It's kind of like me saying, yeah, you want to build a parallel society and you think that the people who won't let you collect your own rainwater aren't going to come in for looking for you. Sure, buddy. You know what I'm saying? I mean, so nobody
Yeah,
has
I know,
the
but
answer.
again, every time that occurs, it is talked about, discussed, and then every time it's brought back up as a dismissive topic, it looks silly because we have talked about this. Every description and every criticism of this is a current description of the status quo. If you are unprepared to deal with and live in the status quo, you are certainly going to be unprepared to be able to live in and deal with any sort of future. That's why we have people on the show to talk about solutions, why we talked earlier about all of the stuff that we would like to do. I mean, it's not as if solutions haven't been presented multiple times in multiple formats on multiple platforms. It's that people are inherently unwilling to listen because they're dismissive, because they see the status quo in every possible other solution, generally speaking.
Whitney, did you want to jump in? I'm so sorry. I didn't want to
No, it's fine. I just
distract you with our back and forth.
Unfortunately, I really wish that what we're being told is the alternative to the unipolar world model of U.S. imperialism was really that much better. I don't think it is. I mean, if you look at the evidence, I think it's pretty clear that a lot of the policies that the three of us find really abhorrent from over the past 3 years are being implemented there, or they're even farther along there than they are here. Right. I mean, all the BRICS countries have a CBDC. Brazil has openly talked about linking social welfare to vaccinations. And medical decisions, you have to basically give up the certain medical decision making in order to receive benefits from the state for poor people. So I think that's really messed up. And when we talked about, when that was talked about in terms of COVID vaccine policy, doing the same thing in the US with the COVID-19 vaccine rollout, it was rightly described as not good. So why is it okay when Lula does it? I don't really see it as being necessarily much better. Russia, their central bank, for example, have openly talked about how they plan to use programmable money, CBDCs, for all different sorts of applications. Sberbank is totally, which is Russia's biggest bank and very much tied up with the state, is run by a guy who's like a top dude at the WEF, who supports all sorts of kind of insane stuff. And Sberbank has already basically become an everything app for Russia. China has an everything app too. And that particular model is all about digital ID and all this stuff, the biometric stuff, domestic surveillance, social recognition, facial recognition, all of that stuff are arguably much more advanced in places like China than even the United States or even the UK, which is farther along than the US in that sense. And I don't think any of that is good. I don't. And if you're against those policies in the US, you should be consistent, right? And be like, I oppose those policies consistently. Not when, team blue or team, there's different teams, right? So like team unipolar, team multipolar, they agree on too much shitty stuff for me to be like, I'm going to cheerlead either of them. You know what I mean? And, as someone who, another thing I do want to bring up too, as someone who's very against US imperialism, I find it very crazy that so many people who posture as anti-imperialist cannot talk about how the US military was involved in a bunch of crazy COVID policy stuff or the vaccine. It's like,
yeah,
hate them all the time, but love them when they do that shit. What?
I can't see how they can't link that they're the same people. Like,
same entity.
Moderna,
DARPA's your friend, but
know.
the Army's not. Like, I don't get it. I don't get it.
That's a crazy. That's a
well, no, because it's different because there's more private contract. No, wait, that's not it. So, okay, it's different because they don't pick people who all have the same direct transhumanist. No shit. It's different because somebody that I am emotionally attached to is on one of those teams. Yeah. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. I don't know.
You're muted, Pasta.
Sounds like a good place to maybe wrap it up with Whitney, that we've had her here for quite some time and whatnot. It's
I probably do have to go.
She hasn't had a babysitter in a long time, so we don't want to push the babysitter too hard today.
No, it's all right. I didn't really sleep last night, so because little man was like, "I'm gonna wake up screaming," babies.
See, I thought you were going to say that's Whitney's life, that you were thinking and your mind was going and you couldn't sleep yourself. You know what I'm saying? But
no.
The little guy, huh?
I get woken up a lot. Yeah, that's all right. Yeah. So, I mean, it is what it is. I mean, it's fun. It's just sometimes this job, like working in the space, can be like really soul sucking, and it's kind of crazy to balance like babies and tiny people with like reading about how the worst people in the world run everything and are killing people all the time. So yeah, I mean, dang Pasta, I know that you like the multipolar thing. You really want to believe on it.
I don't necessarily want to believe on it. I just don't know, I don't want to knock on it so much. I still think it's a better solution to where we're at right now than the unipolar world. And I'd like to believe there is some form of nationalism within Russia, within China, where, I'm saying,
yeah,
like,
I'm sure there's nationalist sentiment there, but though for most of these countries, including in the unipolar, the unipolar centers of power, those are the enemy right now.
Yes.
Right. So I don't know. It seems like BRICS is sort of like being used as a Trojan horse to sort of push for supranational global governance, right?
Yes.
Where basically
right?
Latin America, South America, Lula, right? And Argentina's president openly talking about the need to basically turn South America into the European Union, like a South American Union, have a have their own common currency and integrate the entire region.
Yeah. I know.
How does
there's
that
a lot of bad things.
So
it's
lot of this global governance stuff is about regionalization, following the European model, the European Union model, for every continent. And
Yeah.
then you have those come together, and the EU has a lot of the decisions are made by unelected bureaucrats, right? So how do we avoid that in this supranational system being built? And I honestly think that most regular people don't have any agency in those decisions. The way they get around it is by saying civil society was included, but those civil society organizations are just NGOs funded and created by crazy billionaires half the time.
Here's my thought process on that. And I just want to make it clear, because I'm not going to sit there and sign off, because there's a lot of things Lula would, he signed on for the digital international passports right out of the gate, right even before he was inaugurated. He went over to Davos over there with the G20 and the B20, whatever it was, and signed right on for it and stuff. He hasn't shut up about how people need to get vaccines. And I wish he would shut the fuck up. He's a labor organizer, not a doctor. Just shut your mouth. I don't give a shit what you experienced before in the past. You can't sit there and firmly say these things. And then there's these other parts, where he's mentioning Assange, which are great, and he's let the Iranian ships come in and tell the United States to go screw off, whatever the case may be. I've always had this let's clean our own house mentality, right? Like, we need to take care of the problems with our own house. At the end of the day, when you stack up the chips about Russia and China, and you say this BRICS thing might be a whole kind of, what's the word? Wolf in sheep clothing coming in. At the end of the day, Russia still has 8 bases outside of their own country. China has 3. The United States has 1,000, right?
Okay.
So I'm always with the mentality of like, let's get our shit straight first. We have
I agree with that, because here's the issue. If people in the US don't get their shit straight, what happens is that the unipolar model collapses, the multipolar order comes in. Do you think Russia and China are not going to pillage the US like the US pillaged the fuck out of them a few decades ago?
Absolutely. Well, and all they have to do in a lot of cases is just show them the deed to the land. Oh, no, we already bought that. No, really, it's ours. Okay, and we're going to expand.
Here's the thing. These guys aren't like your friend. Like, maybe, they find it useful that there's people within the US challenging US imperialism, and US imperialism is fucking evil and should be challenged, right? But that doesn't mean, because we agree on that they have our best interests at heart, right? They have their interests at heart. And they've been involved in this paradigm where the CIA has been trying to overthrow them and pillage them and fuck up their countries for decades and decades and decades. You don't think they'd be like, let's give those bastards a taste of their own medicine? I think it would be naive.
I think they're already doing that. I think they're doing that in different ways, right? Like they're trying
They did send up that balloon.
No, they derailed the train. Chinese.
I don't know, but so there's all this like irrational rhetoric around China going around, and people like wanting to blame them for COVID and not talking about like the Fauci, NIH, EcoHealth angle at Wuhan and like all this stuff. And there's a lot of weird stuff, but at the same time, there's weird stuff that's gone on historically with the US government and China that doesn't get talked about. Like the stuff Epstein was doing at the Clinton White House in the mid-90s. Was a calculated transfer of highly sensitive U.S. military tech to Chinese state-owned arms manufacturing conglomerates. That's totally selling out U.S. national security advantages to China for some reason. And it was the people that did Iran-Contra that did that, right? And so during Iran-Contra, they justified Iran-Contra by being like, oh, well, we have to do this to stop communism, right? But then they're giving a bunch of sensitive military technology to China a decade later. So what's really going on, right? Because that was never investigated. Like, it got totally memory hold after 9/11. Congress was investigating it actually when 9/11 happened, and then it never went
How are they
anywhere.
they're gonna blame that completely on the Democrats, right?
No, well, the reason so the Democrats, Clinton was in power and the Clinton administration was involved in it, but it also involved Israel in a very significant way, and the CIA, just like Iran-Contra. And I would argue that's why conservatives haven't bothered to revisit it, is because of, Israel has a pretty outsized role there. And there was a lot of arms being trafficked in the United States illegally, because at that point, the US had banned the importation of Chinese-made weapons into the United States. And before then, the US was the #1 market for Chinese-made weapons after the Iran-Iraq war ended. So, and they were provably being smuggled in by people tied up with this whole network. It's called Chinagate, but really it was this family tied up with Jackson Stevens and Clinton, called the Riyadis, who were based in Indonesia and have a giant Southeast Asia conglomerate that covers China and all other sorts of places. And, there's obviously some weird transnational stuff going on there. There was an interest in giving, equalizing the playing field for some reason. And I don't necessarily understand 100% of what all that stuff means, but I think it's pretty clear that a lot of this rhetoric that we've been fed, about, US versus China, on some levels, at least in the intelligence community, that doesn't exist. So what does that mean? Are we all just being played? I don't know. I mean, it's worth asking it. I just find it fascinating that no one wants to investigate this stuff, at least as it relates to like Epstein White House visits. The Daily Mail can't even touch this stuff. Mark Middleton, they'll talk about, but they won't talk about that Mark Middleton was being investigated by Congress for this very scandal I'm talking about. They just can't talk about it. Why not? They love to dunk on China, but they won't dunk on China for this. Why not? And why won't they talk about people like Steve Schwartzman at Blackstone Capital being super cozy to like the top 2 and 3 people in charge of the Chinese government right now? And he's a major lobbyist for the Pentagon, like has all these Pentagon ties with Blackstone and all this weird capitals going around. It's like, I don't know. When you get into like this upper tier of the global elite, it's just like presidents on left and right in the US, George Bush and Obama and Clinton, all these guys love to like schmooze around and hang out with each other when they're not like in front of the public, be playing politician or whatever. Like how much of that happens on the national stage, international stage. And I like don't necessarily know, but I think, we had to be willing to ask those questions. Like a lot of us are kind of like I was for a time too, before COVID, like kind of stuck in this paradigm where it's like US versus these guys. But I don't know if we can, after what we've seen with COVID, like necessarily go back to that. There's obviously been some weird stuff where like, why are the people we were told are enemies with each other all agree about like this insane tyrannical technocratic doom policies where basically Silicon Valley is just gonna have neo-feudalism in the US and all over the world.
Piers just earlier, just quickly, and then we can throw. But Piers earlier was just talking about this exact thing where there's on a multinational level, it's stages being set for deferment to the WHO in terms of the next emergency. Oh, well, the Matt Hancock WhatsApp leaks prove that you can't trust any of these government clowns. We had to throw Boris out. A head of lettuce lasted longer than Liz Truss. I mean, we have had a bad streak going, and we're obligated to defer to the authority of the WHO during the next pandemic. So let's sign this accord. Hey, everybody who we used to colonize, you sign this too. Hey, everyone that we have an IMF loan going out.
The guy that's going to decide what you have to do at the WHO is Jeremy Farrar, who's a British guy. It's like British Empire through biosecurity, global governance all over again. Okay, all of the former colonies of Britain now had to do whatever some guy tied to British intelligence and the British state tells them to do. Top down. Why aren't people in Russia and China complaining about that?
They are they're planning, I think, to hit us with another pandemic as well. I think that's the odds-on favor for the next scare. I don't think it's the climate change thing or I thought last night Operation Bluebeam was taking place. They were geoengineering the skies here at night, going over the moon.
I had just got on the phone with my girl at Pasta's like, come outside.
Operation Bluebeam, baby.
I gotta go. Yeah, they were chemtrailing the hell out of the sky.
Everywhere last night.
And the moon was bright enough to where you could just, look up and see a nice grid pattern. It didn't take pictures for shit, but it was significantly weirder than usual.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I just think weird stuff's going to keep happening. But what I'm saying is, like, let's not sleepwalk into something, that's not any better than the current system. Because the problem is, when people think that, oh, yeah, the guys in BRICS, they're going to come in and save everything, that's an excuse for us to just sit on our ass and just let these big guys handle stuff, right? And we can't do that. It's sort of it's a different iteration of sort of like QAnon, trust the plan. These political leaders are going to do all the hard, heavy lifting for us.
I don't know if it's necessarily that, from the sense of it's just like enough with American hegemony. That's the big thing.
I agree with that, but what I'm saying is there are people in the pro-BRICS camp who are like, well, let's just let them do it. They know what they're doing, and we're going to cheerlead them and justify even when they do stuff that sucks. And I don't think I don't agree with that approach.
I personally. You want to plug anything, Whitney, before we get on out of here? Anything fun coming up? Anything?
Yeah, I mean, I have an article I've been working on since November about one of the Sustainable Development Goals and how they're trying to basically destroy the world's oceans by claiming they're conserving it and stuff. So that'll be out sometime this month. Johnny's got some stuff coming out. Ed Berger, who was my research assistant for One Nation Under Blackmail, has a great upcoming piece about some crazy Robert Maxwell fuckery down in Texas in the 1980s, all sorts of stuff we have cooking. I'm probably going to have to move at some point, though, probably around the mid part of the year, to doing more video stuff. I've been writing for a really long time. And if you're familiar with my writing, I write long things. So I basically have like hand arthritis after the book now. And I'm 33. So if I don't like give that a rest, I'm basically going to be like no hands McGee in a couple of years. So I'd rather not be that, So, so I mean, unlimited hangout and my content might change a bit towards the later part of the year. I might just do more video series, or maybe have like a, talk show, whatever, like a lot of other people in alt media do. Cause there's not that, there's a lot more people in alt media that do videos than writing, but I just don't know if my, I mean, I'm really burnt out from writing an insane book at the same year I had a baby. Just fuck that. I'm not doing that again.
I'm glad to see that Johnny's popping up more places. I see him more and more and stuff like that. And when you guys are together too as well, it's pretty fun. So when you do those shows, I'd look forward to that, like a weekly show.
Yeah, so we might move to that kind of model or something at some point. But I have some articles I've been meaning to get out for some time. So I'll be doing those and then looking at sort of maybe readjusting stuff. Because also, like, a lot of people just don't freaking read anymore. So like maybe I should just give up writing just for that,
Yeah.
It's
Whitney,
kind of
thank you so much for coming
though.
on.
Yeah, of course.
Really
Though, I mean, at some point there probably will be a volume 3 of my book, which will hopefully solve this mystery that's been bugging me for years, which is the why was Epstein actually arrested in 2019? Because the Department of Justice doesn't all of a sudden care about sex crimes of committed against poor people decades ago. Right. It was obviously something else. So, volume 3 is going to be me trying to solve some of those mysteries.
Heck yeah.
Public pressure?
That's a lot.
No, I don't think it's public pressure. No, I think, well, if you ask me, I think it's a face-off between different factions of powerful intelligence-linked actors who got really pissed off about some stuff Epstein was doing in around the 2016-2019 ballpark.
This is going to be a good volume 3 right there.
Yeah, but just people listening, do not expect that shit this year. Just don't. Like when I have time to write it, I'll write it and then it will come out. I'm not doing like book deadlines again with 2 little kids and like spotty childcare and the economy and world collapsing around me. That does not make any sense. So I'm not gonna.
Well, if you're
betting myself in the corner again.
If you're a betting person, I bet you'd see me and Johnny V hanging out, doing a toast, drinking some type of cocktail, and matching Adidas jackets this year. I would bet on that.
Well, maybe if you guys come visit Chile, that would happen.
Well, Argentina's this year, and it's like a little stopover. We're kind of already.
Yeah, it is at right next door.
There. Right there. So
yeah, we're not that far from Bariloche, if you know that place in Argentina. But I'm assuming you'd be going to Buenos Aires, right? Argentina's a freaking massive country.
It's a big country. So we can that's the thing. Sometimes we just don't go to the capital of the common area. Sometimes we go to different areas strategically. So when we observe an election, we can get a sense of what's really going on in those particular rural areas or some places that are off the beaten narrow. I mean, in Nicaragua, we were on the Caribbean coast. the opposite side of Managua of the country observing that election. So who knows? Whatever kind of factors in stopping in Chile and hanging out with Johnny V and Whitney Webb. See, I couldn't even rhyme. I screwed
That's
it on
all right.
up
You
there.
don't need to rhyme it.
I know. Whitney, thank you so much for coming on the show today. We love you. Thank you for surprising the audience today.
Yeah, no problems. Thanks for the nickname. I hope everyone quickly forgets.
Whitney Webb? No, that's not Whitney Wee. Don't say Whitney Wee. Don't get me in trouble.
It's all right.
Bye.
Take care,
Bye,
Whitney.
guys.
We'll see you soon. Whitney